this former economist is being represented by the Citizen Action Defense Fund. In the interest of transparency, the Citizen Action Defense Fund is also representing us in a public records lawsuit against the city of Seattle. But they've taken his case up. And so, I've talked about my opinion of this, how I think that this whistleblower is credible. I think that what he's claiming happened is in line with a series of other lies that have been told by Governor Jay Inslee and his administration about the impacts of the Climate Commitment Act. So for that reason, I find him credible. But I wanted to have his attorney on, Jackson Maynard with the Citizen Action Defense Fund, just to talk about what evidence there is. What evidence does he have that backs up the claim he's making that his bosses at the Washington State Department of Transportation, and maybe even higher up, sought to suppress his estimate of what the CCA would do to fuel prices? Jackson Maynard, welcome back to Undivided.
Thank you so much, Brandy. Appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Yes, we covered this quite a bit yesterday, but I think for skeptics, they might say, oh, here's a guy, he's, resigned from his job, a grieved former employee who just wants a payday. So what do you think are the elements of his case that bolster it?
Well, I think there's a lot. If you talk to him, and that was really what jumped out at me, you don't have to talk to the guy for very long to realize, number one, he's brilliant, and he's been doing this a long time, and is just a brilliant economist, and also just how credible he is, how sincere, and how frankly hurt he was, and kind of shocked. The funny thing about my client is he's actually supportive of cap and trade. I mean, he actually thinks that it is a good program, and you can agree or disagree about that. But this case is not about whether cap and trade makes sense. It's for him about whether or not he should have to lie to support something that he knows isn't true as a part of his job, to support some political narrative. As far as what supports his claim, he's got contemporaneous notes that are very strong evidence of these multiple meetings. He has emails as well, and that substantiate his claims. And then, discovery is ongoing. That's why we have that as part of the process. And if we get to the point, if the state's unwilling to be reasonable in resolving this matter for him, then we can use the discovery process as well to get further evidence. But something else that substantiates his claim that kind of came up more recently, really since we filed the claim, is I understand from the governor's office there was pushback on this idea that he was somehow forced out of his job by the Department of Transportation. Well, I took the liberty over the weekend of watching the testimony on House Bill 1838, which was the bill that the Office of Financial Management requested that eliminated the guy's job and transferred it to another agency. And in that testimony, not only do you have OFM saying, yeah, the Department of Transportation asked for this, but OFM is under the governor's office. They're asking for it. And one of the people that my client identified in the demand letter is also sitting there testifying, prepared to testify in support of this. And this bill was dropped a month after my client was pressured. So that is another thing that substantiates what he's saying. I mean, not only was it DOT asking for this, but it was the governor's office getting this guy's job eliminated, frankly, in retaliation for him having the courage to tell the truth.
Let me understand the timeline of that a little bit better. So
Sure.
He's feeling pressured to lie about what he has forecasted, which is that cap and trade would increase gas prices 45 to 50 cents per gallon. So did he resign and then they eliminated his position, or did they eliminate his position and then rather than be transferred, he resigned?
So the timeline is absolutely important here. January 18th at 10:10 a.m., he has the first meeting with his supervisor in which they say management would prefer that you not include the impacts of cap and trade in your estimates. He pushes back. He says, I'm not going to jimmy the numbers. There are other meetings after that in the days that follow that in which they're coming back to him. He sticks to his guns. He issues his estimate and includes the numbers. On February 20th, a bill is introduced in the legislature in the House that eliminates my client's position, transfers it to another agency, and then in subsequent hearings, that bill eventually is passed and OFM testifies in favor of it. So the position would be under the bill eliminated November of 2024. So he's there, but he knows he's going to have no job after 2024. He applies for a supervisor position. He's turned down for that. And then they start just this pattern of humiliating him. They won't give him the software updates he needs that other employees have to be able to do his job. They won't allow him to work remotely when every other, frankly, frickin' employee in state government post-pandemic is able to work remotely. My client has to, come in and sit in. He's invited to meetings that he has to be there in person, and then they don't show up. His supervisor doesn't show up for the meeting. The final straw for him, though, was when he wanted to go visit his elderly mother out of state and submitted a leave request. They did have a meeting that he had always participated in remotely, like everyone else. It was a remote meeting, and he said, look, I'm submitting this leave request. It's Thanksgiving weekend. I know I'm supposed to present. I wanted to go visit my mom. I will do this on my own time. I will attend the meeting, do whatever on my own time. I just want to go visit my mom. And in October, they refused to approve that leave request. And that's when he decided to retire. He did have some conversations earlier in the year when kind of after the bill was passed that was going to eliminate his position, and he was trying to figure out to, retire. He's 64 years old. And so, he's trying to figure out what to do. He didn't want to retire. He wanted to finish out his career at the DOT, and that was just not going to be possible. So I think it was something he kind of floated and then was just trying to figure out a way, to make it work. And then finally, it just kept getting worse and worse. And then in October, that was the final straw.
And has he indicated to you that there were any issues he had with feeling mistreated at work prior to his forecast about cap and trade?
He hasn't. As a matter of fact, he got stellar performance reviews, according to my client. And in fact, that was another thing. We found evidence, and he's provided evidence that DOT tried to go and backdate some of those and actually change those performance evaluations. And you can see that in the screenshots that he's had. So I feel for the guy. The whole reason we're doing this is to try to make him whole and try to give him something that he can now, be made whole as a result of not being able to those lost years of salary, those lost years of potential retirement benefits, and also his reputational damage.
Yeah, and I get that that's your job, certainly, to represent your client and not some bigger, broader interest. But this is a huge, if true, story about what I really feel like is corruption. And so I guess if the state comes to you guys and settles and you avoid trial, I almost feel like it's letting the state off the hook. I want to know what discovery documents would show, for instance. So is there any sort of, I know you're familiar with all the sort of lies that have been told about cap and trade. I'm characterizing them as lies that have been told about the cap and trade program. So when it comes to all of that, Governor Jay Inslee saying it wouldn't raise gas prices, decisions to hide line items on Puget Sound energy bills, if you go to trial, does that all factor into your case?
Certainly credibility of witnesses is always an issue at trial. And so that is all stuff that can come into play if the state refuses to find a way to be reasonable in resolving this matter and avoiding the costs, the expense, and frankly, the potential embarrassment of trial. My obligations to my client, I am a public interest. I represent a public interest nonprofit, and so, that certainly the greater public good is why we're taking on this cost. We are not charging him attorney's fees. We're not charging him for this work, but my obligation is to him and to try to make him whole. That said, I do think that this case has larger implications for public policy, regardless again of whether you agree on cap and trade. What I think everybody should agree on, so that they can know whether or not it's a good policy, is that the lawmakers and the executive and everybody should have numbers that they can rely on to be able to properly evaluate the program. And so transparency, I think, is an important value at stake in this case, and then making sure that government is held accountable. The larger idea of government not being able to bully state employees too. I mean, I'm a former state employee. My parents were. I really appreciate the sacrifices a lot of times that you make in that line of work. And I think that people understand politicians are going to do political stuff, but for the front line, just state employees are there to do the job and kind of serve the public. Idea that they would be leaned on in this way, I think, is really repulsive, and that's also one of the other issues in this case.
Yeah, let's end with this. So the claim, and you use the quote again, that he was told by management, that he was told that management would prefer that he did not include cap and trade surcharges in his quarterly fuel price forecast. Do we know what management means? Do we know who management is?
My client understood from that conversation and subsequent conversations that it was his, so he was having those with his supervisor, and that person is identified in the demand letter, but that it was Amber Colson at the State Department of Transportation, and then Eric Hansen, the Office of Financial Management. One of the other things that after this, the way that my client's job duties changed is that he had to start clearing his estimates with OFM and Mr. Hansen, and that's something he never had to do again. OFM is part of the governor's office, statutory by law, and also they're just part of the governor's office, and so the idea that he had to clear what should be just a matter of sixth grade math, these estimates with a political entity, was very frustrating to him. So that's who I understood. We can see how far this goes. I think a fair question is, what did the governor know? When did he know it? While he was running around telling the public that it was the fuel companies, it was all of these other things that happened that caused these costs, and he was lying about whether or not the costs were increasing. I think we should know whether or not people working for him were acting at his behest. So
that is the key. Whether these forecasts from your client were known to the governor, were known to his immediate circle in his office, and whether he still went out and told the public that this would have a negligible impact on gas prices. I hope you can find that out through the course of this case. Jackson Maynard, thank you so much.
Thank you.
What did the governor know, and when did the governor know it?